The morning sun of Arcturus Prime rose over the Galactic Military Academy, painting the white buildings in shades of gold and orange. Commander Verk stood at the window of his quarters, watching the light spread across the training grounds below. He had seen this sunrise more than 70,000 times. He remembered every single one. Verk was a Kelvari, one of the oldest warrior species in the known galaxy. He stood 7 feet tall, his body covered in dark green scales that had stopped blades and bullets many times over his long life. He had 4 arms, each one capable of holding a weapon with perfect control. His eyes were yellow with black slits, and they missed nothing. For 200 years, he had served as the chief combat instructor at the academy. Students came from across 17 star systems to learn from him. Princes and generals, soldiers and spies, beings of every shape and size had stood on his training floor and tried to match his skill. None of them had succeeded. In 2 centuries of teaching, no student had ever landed a single strike on Commander Verk during sparring practice. Not one touch, not one scratch. This was not a rumor or a legend. It was a recorded fact, verified by the Academy's automated judging systems. He wore this record like a medal. It proved what he had always believed, that discipline, experience, and natural ability would always defeat raw effort. Some beings were simply born to fight, others were not. No amount of training could change this basic truth. On this particular morning, Verk was not thinking about his record. He was thinking about the message that had arrived from Academy Command the night before. After years of debate and negotiation, the Council had finally approved the admission of human students. Humans. Verk let out a low growl at the thought. He had studied the reports on this species. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 30 years ago. Before that, they had been trapped on a single planet, fighting among themselves like animals. They were small. They were weak. Their bones broke easily. Their skin tore like paper. They could not see in the dark. They could not hear high frequencies. They needed to sleep for 8 hours every single day just to function. By every measure that mattered, humans were one of the weakest intelligent species in the galaxy. And now they would be walking into his training hall, expecting to become warriors. Verk turned away from the window and began to dress for the orientation ceremony. He selected his formal uniform, the black fabric decorated with silver symbols that marked his rank and achievements. Each symbol represented a battle won, a student trained, a skill mastered. There were so many symbols that the uniform was more silver than black. The orientation was held in the Grand Hall, a massive room with walls of polished stone and a ceiling that showed a live image of the stars outside. Hundreds of new recruits stood in neat rows, arranged by species. Verk walked among them, studying each group with a critical eye. The Torvians were easy to spot. They stood 8 feet tall, their bodies packed with muscle, their skin a deep shade of blue. They were natural warriors, strong and disciplined. Verk had trained many Torvians over the years. They learned slowly but fought hard. The Meekith were smaller but no less impressive. Their bodies were covered in natural armor, a black exoskeleton that could stop a knife blade. They thought in patterns and angles, approaching combat like a mathematical problem. Verk respected their precision. There were Sylvani with their 4 eyes and quick reflexes. There were Droth with their thick hides and powerful tails. There were a dozen other species, each one bringing some natural advantage to the art of war. And then there were the humans. They stood at the back of the hall, a group of 12 wearing simple gray uniforms. Verk walked toward them, his 4 arms clasped behind his back. The humans watched him approach with expressions he found difficult to read. Some looked nervous, some looked excited. One of them, he noticed, looked neither. She was a young woman, small even by human standards. She could not have been more than 5 feet tall. Her hair was black and cut short. Her skin was brown and there was a thin scar running across her left eyebrow. She stood perfectly still, her back straight, her hands at her sides. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. They were dark brown, almost black, and they were watching him with an intensity that seemed wrong for such a small creature. There was no fear in those eyes, no excitement, just focus. Verk stopped in front of the human group. He looked down at them from his full height, letting the silence stretch. "I am Commander Verk Sauron," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "I have trained warriors for 200 years. I have seen species rise and fall. I have watched empires crumble and new ones take their place. In all that time, I have learned one simple truth." He paused, making sure every human was listening. Combat is not about desire. It is not about courage. It is not about how badly you want to win. Combat is about capability. Either you have the physical tools to fight or you do not. No amount of wanting will grow you claws. No amount of training will thicken your skin. He let his gaze move across the group, stopping briefly on each face. "You are humans, you are soft, you are slow, you are fragile. The galaxy did not design you for war. It designed you for survival and barely that. You will find my classes difficult. Many of you will fail. This is not cruelty. This is simply the truth." Most of the humans looked down or away. A few clenched their jaws in anger. One tall man in the back looked like he wanted to argue. But the small woman with the scar did not react at all. She simply continued to watch him with those dark, focused eyes. Her expression had not changed. Verk felt something strange in that moment, a tiny flicker of curiosity. He pushed it aside. "Report to Training Hall 7 at dawn tomorrow," he said. "Do not be late." He turned and walked away, already putting the humans out of his mind. They would wash out within a month, 2 months at most. He had seen it happen countless times with weaker species. But as he left the grand hall, something made him glance back over his shoulder. The small woman was still watching him, still perfectly still, still showing nothing on her face. Her name, he would learn later, was Corporal Enyone Vasquez. And she was about to teach him something he had forgotten long ago. The weeks that followed were exactly as Verk had predicted. The humans struggled. They struggled with everything. The basic endurance test required students to run for 3 hours without stopping. The Torvians finished easily. The Meekith clicked along on their armored legs without complaint. The humans collapsed after 90 minutes, their bodies covered in sweat, their lungs burning for air. The strength exercises were worse. Students had to lift weighted blocks above their heads while standing on unstable platforms. A Torvian could hold the position for an hour. A human could manage perhaps 10 minutes before their arms began to shake and their balance failed. Combat drills exposed every weakness. Human reaction times were slower than almost every other species. Their reach was shorter. Their strikes lacked power. When a Sylvani punched, the blow could crack stone. When a human punched, it barely left a bruise. Verk watched all of this with grim satisfaction. He was not a cruel instructor. He did not enjoy seeing students fail. But he believed in truth, and the truth was clear. Humans did not belong in his academy. 3 of the 12 humans quit within the first 2 weeks. They packed their belongings and took transport ships back to Earth, their dreams of becoming galactic warriors broken. Verk noted their departure in his records and thought nothing more of it. 2 more humans were injured during training and had to withdraw. One broke his leg during a fall. Another tore something in her shoulder that required months of healing. The medical staff did what they could, but human bodies simply could not take the punishment that other species endured. By the end of the first month, only 7 humans remained. Enyone Vasquez was one of them. Verk began to notice her during the 3rd week. Not because she was succeeding where others failed. She was not. Her test scores were average at best. Her physical performance was nothing special. She fell down. She got hurt. She lost every sparring match she entered, often within seconds. What made him notice her was something else entirely. She never stopped. Every morning, Verk arrived at Training Hall 7 exactly 1 hour before dawn to prepare for the day's lessons. On the first day of the 3rd week, He found Enyone already there. She was practicing basic defensive movements, repeating the same sequence over and over in the dim light. He watched her from the doorway without speaking. Her form was wrong. Her timing was off. She made the same mistakes again and again. But she kept going, her face tight with concentration, sweat dripping from her chin. The next morning she was there again, and the morning after that, and every morning that followed. Verk began to pay attention to her schedule. He learned that she trained for 2 hours before his class started. She attended every lesson, even the optional ones. She stayed for an hour after the other students left, and then, late at night, she returned to practice alone until her body gave out. She was sleeping perhaps 4 hours a day. She was pushing herself to the edge of collapse, and she was doing it all without complaint, without asking for help, without showing any sign that she expected special treatment. One evening, Verk finished his paperwork and decided to walk through the training halls before returning to his quarters. It was past midnight. The academy was quiet. Most students were asleep. But Training Hall 7 was not empty. Enyone stood in the center of the room, practicing the same defensive sequence she had been working on for weeks. Her movements were better now. Not perfect, but better. She had corrected some of her mistakes. Her timing had improved. Her balance was stronger. She did not notice him standing in the doorway. Her entire focus was on the movements. Block, step, turn, block, step, turn. She repeated the sequence 50 times without stopping. Then she paused, breathed deeply, and started again. Verk watched her for nearly an hour. She never looked up. She never rested. She simply kept going, over and over, making tiny adjustments each time. Finally, he stepped into the light. "You are wasting your time, human." Enyone stopped mid-movement. She turned to face him, and he saw that her eyes were red from exhaustion. There were dark circles under them. Her hands were shaking slightly from fatigue. But her voice was steady when she spoke. "Permission to ask a question, Commander." He nodded. "In your 200 years of teaching, has anyone ever come close to hitting you during sparring?" The question surprised him. Students did not usually ask about his record. They accepted it as a fact of nature, like gravity or the speed of light. They did not question it. He considered lying. He considered telling her that many students had come close, that his record was simply the result of narrow victories and lucky dodges. But Verk had never been a liar. "No," he said, "no one has ever come close." Enyone wiped the sweat from her face with the back of her hand. She looked at him for a long moment, and something changed in her expression. Not anger, not frustration, something else, something that looked almost like anticipation. "Then you have never really been tested," she said. The words hung in the air between them. Verk felt his scales tighten. It was an automatic response, a sign of agitation that he had learned to control centuries ago. But for some reason, this small human with her simple words had triggered it. "You think you can test me?" he asked. His voice was quiet, dangerous. "Not yet," Enyone said, "but I am going to keep training until I can." She held his gaze for another moment. Then she turned back to the center of the room and began her sequence again. Block, step, turn, block, step, turn. Verk stood there for a long time, watching her. He told himself that she was foolish, that her confidence was misplaced, that no amount of training could overcome the gap between their species. But as he walked back to his quarters that night, he found that her words would not leave his mind. "You have never really been tested." He had been the best for 200 years. He had defeated every opponent. He had earned every honor. His record was perfect. And yet, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Commander Verk Sauron felt something that might have been doubt. After that night, Verk found himself watching Enyone more closely during training. He told himself it was simply professional interest. He told himself he was studying a curiosity, nothing more. But deep down, he knew there was something else driving his attention. He wanted to understand how she thought. The more he watched, the more he realized that Enyone learned differently from any student he had ever trained. When a Torvian failed at a technique, they would repeat it exactly the same way, trusting that repetition would eventually lead to success. When a Meeketh failed, they would analyze the physics of their movement and make small, calculated adjustments. Enyone did neither of these things. When she failed, she studied her failure like it was a gift. She would pause, close her eyes, and think. Sometimes she would ask other students to demonstrate the technique again so she could watch from different angles. Sometimes she would record herself and play back the footage, comparing her movements to the instructor's demonstrations frame by frame. And then she would try something completely different. It was not random. Verk could see that now. Every change she made was based on something she had observed. She was collecting data, building a model in her mind, testing theories about why her body worked the way it did and how she could make it work better. During a grappling exercise, Verk watched her lose to a Silvani student 3 times in a row. The Silvani was faster and had better reflexes. By every standard measure, Enyone should have had no chance. On the 4th attempt, she did something Verk had never seen before. The Silvani lunged at her, expecting an easy victory. Enyone grabbed his arm and twisted her own body in a strange direction, pulling the Silvani off balance. But his grip on her shoulder was too strong. Her arm bent at an unnatural angle, and Verk heard a wet pop as her shoulder dislocated. Enyone did not scream. She did not stop. Using her one good arm and the momentum of the Silvani's confusion, she swept his legs and dropped him to the ground. Then, before he could recover, she slammed her dislocated shoulder against the floor. Another pop, the joint snapped back into place. She stood up, flexed her arm to test it, and nodded to the Silvani to indicate she was ready to continue. The Silvani stared at her with all 4 of his eyes wide with shock. He had never seen anything like this. Neither had anyone else in the room. Neither had Verk. He dismissed the class early that day. He needed time to think. That evening, he accessed the Academy's database and began researching human physiology. What he found surprised him. Humans were indeed weak by galactic standards. Their bones broke easily. Their muscles tired quickly. Their senses were dull. But they had other qualities, strange qualities. Humans could run for longer than almost any species without stopping. Not fast, but far. Their ancestors had hunted prey by simply following it until it collapsed from exhaustion. Humans could recover from injuries that would cripple other species. Their bodies healed quickly and adapted to damage in ways that seemed almost impossible. And humans had a nervous system that could ignore pain under certain conditions. When their survival was threatened, they could push through levels of physical trauma that should have rendered them unconscious. Verk sat back in his chair and considered what he had learned. These were not the qualities of a warrior species. A true warrior species was born with claws and fangs and armor. A true warrior species did not need to adapt because it was already perfectly designed for combat. But humans were not designed for combat. They were designed for something else, something that had no name in any galactic language. They were designed to refuse to lose. The next morning, Enyone arrived at the training hall before dawn as usual. Verk was waiting for her. "I watched you yesterday," he said, "with the Silvani." Enyone nodded but did not speak. "You dislocated your own shoulder to gain an advantage. Then you put it back and kept fighting." "It was the only way to break his grip," she said. "I calculated that the pain would be manageable." "Manageable," Verk repeated the word slowly. "Most species would have surrendered the moment the joint separated. The pain alone would have been too much." Enyone shrugged with the shoulder she had dislocated. It seemed to work normally now. "Pain is information," she said. "It tells you something is wrong, but once you know what is wrong, you do not need the pain anymore. You can choose to ignore it." Verk stared at her for a long moment. "That is not how biology works." "It is how human biology works, Commander. We are very good at ignoring things that try to stop us. She walked past him to the center of the training hall and began her morning practice. Block, step, turn, block, step, turn. Verk watched her for several minutes. Her form had improved significantly over the past weeks. She was still not as fast or as strong as the other species, but there was something different about the way she moved now. Something more efficient, more purposeful. She had been studying him, he realized, watching his demonstrations, analyzing his techniques, and she had been adapting what she learned to fit her own body. He found himself curious about what she would look like in another month, another year. How much could a human improve if they simply refused to stop trying? The thought was interrupted by Elena's voice. "Commander, I would like to make a request." Verk raised one of his brow ridges. "Speak." Elena turned to face him. Her expression was calm, her voice steady. "I request a sparring match with you." The training hall fell silent. A few early students who had arrived froze in place, unable to believe what they had heard. Verk felt his scales tighten again. "You want to fight me," he said. "I want to test myself against the best," Elena replied. "There is no better way to learn." "You will lose." "Probably." "You may be injured." "Possibly." Verk studied her face, looking for signs of arrogance or foolishness. He found neither. She was not challenging him to prove something. She was not trying to embarrass him or make a name for herself. She simply wanted to fight him because fighting him was the hardest thing she could do. And humans, he was beginning to understand, were drawn to hard things. Against every instinct, against 2 centuries of experience telling him this was a waste of time, Verk made his decision. "1 week," he said, "prepare yourself." Elena nodded once. "I will, Commander." And in that moment, watching the small human woman return to her practice, Verk felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt uncertain about the outcome of a fight. Word of the match spread across the academy like fire through dry grass. By the end of the first day, every student and instructor knew what was going to happen. By the end of the second day, the news had reached the Admiralty itself. A human had challenged Commander Verk. Some thought it was a joke. The idea of a small, fragile human fighting the greatest combat instructor in 17 star systems seemed absurd. It was like a prey animal challenging a predator. It was like a candle challenging the sun. Others thought it was arrogance. The humans had only been in the galaxy for 30 years. They did not understand how things worked. They did not know their place. This human girl needed to be taught a lesson, and Verk would teach it to her. But a few, a very small few, were curious. They had heard stories about the human woman who trained 20 hours a day. They had seen her dislocate her own shoulder and keep fighting. They had watched her fail and fail and fail, and never once ask for mercy. These few wondered if something interesting might happen. Elena spent the week preparing in her usual way. She trained before dawn. She attended every class. She practiced late into the night. But now there was a new focus to her movements. She was not just learning techniques anymore. She was building a strategy. She studied every recording of Verk she could find. She watched him spar with students, with other instructors, with visiting warriors from distant systems. She watched him win 1,000 times without ever being touched. And she looked for patterns. Every fighter had patterns. It did not matter how skilled they were. Every living creature developed habits, preferences, tendencies. The key was finding them. Verk was disciplined. His movements were perfect. But that perfection was itself a pattern. He always responded to attacks in the optimal way. He always chose the most efficient counter. He never did anything unexpected because unexpected moves were inefficient. Elena smiled when she realized this. Verk's greatest strength was also his greatest weakness. He had never needed to be unpredictable. He had never needed to take risks. He had always been able to win by simply being better than his opponents. He had never faced someone who was willing to trade pain for opportunity. He had never faced someone who would accept injury to create an opening. He had never faced someone who did not fight to avoid losing. Humans did not fight to avoid losing. Humans fought to win. There was a difference. The day of the match arrived. Training Hall 7 had been transformed. Extra seating had been brought in to accommodate the crowd. Instructors filled the front rows. Students packed the back. Members of the Admiralty sat in a special section, their uniforms decorated with medals and honors. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. Verk entered first. He wore simple training clothes, black and undecorated. He did not need symbols to prove who he was. His scales gleamed under the lights. His 4 arms hung loose at his sides. His yellow eyes scanned the crowd without emotion. Then Enyone entered. She looked small. That was the first thing everyone noticed. Surrounded by beings twice her size, she looked like a child who had wandered into the wrong room. Her training clothes were the same gray as every other human student. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her face showed nothing. She walked to the center of the ring and bowed to Verk. He returned the bow. The automated judge announced the rules. Standard sparring. First clean strike wins. No weapons, no killing blows. The crowd fell silent. Enyone moved first. It was a mistake. Everyone knew it was a mistake. You did not attack Verk. You waited for him to attack you and then you tried to survive. That was the only strategy that made sense. But Enyone did not want to survive. She wanted to learn. She came at him fast, faster than Verk expected from a human. She threw a strike at his midsection, and he blocked it easily with one of his lower arms. She twisted and aimed a kick at his knee, and he stepped aside without effort. She attacked again, and again, and again. Each attack was different. Each one came from a new angle at a new speed with a new target. She was not trying to hit him. She was testing him, gathering data, watching how he responded to each type of assault. Verk realized what she was doing, and for the first time in the match, he felt a flicker of concern. She was reading him. The minutes passed. Enyone kept attacking. Verk kept defending. The crowd began to murmur. This was not the quick victory they had expected. The human was still standing. The human was still fighting. Verk decided to end it. He launched a counterattack, moving with the speed and precision that had made him legendary. His upper right arm swept toward her head while his lower left arm aimed for her ribs. It was a combination that had defeated 1,000 opponents. There was no way to block both strikes at once. Enyone did not try to block either one. Instead, she stepped forward directly into the attack. His upper arm passed over her head as she ducked. His lower arm struck her ribs and he heard bone crack. But she was already moving, twisting inside his guard, using his own momentum against him. She got behind him. For a single heartbeat, she was in his blind spot. Her hand shot forward, palm open, aimed at the base of his skull. The crowd gasped. Verk spun, all 4 arms moving to defend. He was fast, incredibly fast, the fastest being in the academy. But Enyone was faster by a fraction of a second. Her palm stopped 1 inch from his throat. She held the position for a moment, looking up into his yellow eyes. Then she stepped back and lowered her hand. Contact, the automated judge announced. Victory to Corporal Enyone Vasquez. The hall erupted in chaos. Students shouted and screamed. Instructors stared in disbelief. The Admiralty members spoke rapidly to each other, their faces showing shock and confusion. Enyone stood in the center of the ring, one hand pressed against her broken ribs, her breath coming in short gasps. But she was smiling. Not a smile of triumph, not a smile of pride. A smile of satisfaction. She had learned what she wanted to learn. Verk stood frozen for a long moment. Then slowly he began to laugh. It was a deep, rumbling sound that silenced the crowd. No one had ever heard Commander Verk Soren laugh before. He looked down at the small human woman who had just ended his perfect record. "You pulled your strike," he said. "You could have finished the blow." Alina nodded, still pressing her ribs. I did not come here to hurt you, Commander. I came here to learn. Verk laughed again, and this time there was something different in the sound. Something that might have been respect. Then you have learned well, Corporal Vasquez. He extended one of his forearms toward her. After a moment of surprise, Alina reached out and clasped it. The crowd began to cheer. The medical staff insisted on keeping Alina overnight for observation. 3 of her ribs were cracked. She had deep bruises across her torso. Her body was exhausted from weeks of pushing beyond its limits. She slept for 14 hours straight. When she woke, she found a message waiting for her on the room's communication panel. It was from Commander Verk. He requested a meeting in his private quarters that evening. Alina arrived at the appointed time. The door opened before she could knock. Verk's quarters were simple and clean. There were no decorations on the walls, no trophies or medals on display, just functional furniture and a large window overlooking the academy grounds. He was standing by the window when she entered, his back to her, all 4 arms clasped behind him. "Do you know how I felt when your hand stopped at my throat?" he asked without turning around. Alina thought about the question carefully before answering. Surprised, I think, maybe confused. Verk turned to face her. His yellow eyes studied her with an expression she could not quite identify. "I felt alive," he said. "For the first time in 150 years, I felt truly alive." He walked to a chair and sat down heavily, as if a great weight had settled on his shoulders. When you are the best at something for long enough, you forget what it feels like to be challenged. You forget what it feels like to be uncertain. You go through the motions of training and fighting, but there is no risk. There is no growth. There is only repetition. He looked at her with something that might have been gratitude. "You reminded me what it feels like to face an opponent who might actually defeat you. That is a gift, Corporal, one I did not know I needed." Alina sat down across from him, moving carefully to avoid straining her injured ribs. "I did not defeat you, Commander. I landed one strike. In a real fight, you would have killed me in seconds." "Perhaps," Verk agreed. "But you landed a strike. You found a gap in my defense that no one else has found in 200 years. How did you do it?" Alina considered the question. "I stopped trying to beat you," she said finally. "I knew I could not match your strength or speed or skill, so instead I tried to understand you. I watched you fight for weeks. I studied your patterns, and I realized something." "What?" "You always make the optimal choice. Every time. You respond to attacks in the most efficient way possible. It is what makes you so difficult to defeat." Verk nodded slowly, and this was a weakness. "It was a pattern," Alina said, "and patterns can be predicted. I knew that if I attacked in a certain way, you would respond in a certain way. So I planned my final move based on where I knew you would be, not where you were." Verk was silent for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and let out a breath that seemed to carry centuries of tension with it. "Humans," he said quietly, "I underestimated your species." "Most people do," Alina replied. "We are used to it." She straightened in her chair, wincing slightly at the pain in her ribs. "Can I tell you something, Commander? Something I learned growing up on Earth." He nodded. "Humans are not strong. We have no claws, no armor, no venom. For most of our history, we were prey. Every predator on our planet was faster than us, stronger than us, better armed than us." She met his eyes directly. "But we survived. We survived because we learned something that no other species on our planet learned. We learned how to refuse to give up." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "When a human is knocked down, we get back up. When we are hurt, we keep fighting. When we are told something is impossible, we try anyway. It is not courage, it is not strength, it is something else. Something we do not even have a word for." She turned back to face him. "You asked me how I landed that strike. The real answer is that I was willing to accept broken ribs for the chance to reach your throat. A Torvian would not do that. A Meekith would not do that. They are too logical, too careful, too unwilling to damage themselves for an uncertain outcome. And you were willing, Verk said. Humans are always willing, Alina replied. That is our nature. We will trade pain for opportunity every single time. We will endure anything if we believe there is even a small chance of success. She smiled slightly. You have been undefeated for 200 years, Commander. You have never known what it feels like to be the weaker fighter. You have never experienced what it is like to stand against something stronger than you and fight anyway, knowing you will probably lose. And you have experienced this, Verk said. Every human has, Alina replied. We grow up surrounded by things that are bigger and stronger and faster than we are. We learn to keep going anyway. It is the first lesson we ever learn. Verk was quiet for a long time. The stars wheeled slowly past the window as the Academy station rotated through the void. Finally, he spoke. I have decided to make a recommendation to the Academy Council. Alina waited. I am going to request that you be promoted to the rank of Assistant Instructor. You will help me train the combat classes. You will teach others what you have taught me. Alina's eyes widened. Commander, I am still a student. I have not even completed basic training. You landed a strike on me, Verk said simply. That is qualification enough. He stood and extended one of his arms toward her. Do you accept? Alina looked at his hand, then at his face. She saw no mockery there, no tricks, only the offer of an equal meeting an equal. She clasped his arm. I accept, Commander. Verk nodded once. Then report to Training Hall 7 at dawn. We have much work to do. As Alina left his quarters, she passed a group of students in the corridor. They stared at her with wide eyes, whispering to each other. The human who had touched the untouchable commander. The small, fragile creature who had done the impossible. Alina paid them no attention. She was already thinking about tomorrow's training. In the years that followed, the story of Alina Vasquez spread across the galaxy. It became a legend, then a lesson, then a warning. And among the many species who heard the tale, a simple saying began to circulate. Never underestimate a human. Not because they are strong, not because they are fast, not because they are clever or dangerous or skilled. Underestimate them, never because they have forgotten how to quit. And in a galaxy full of warriors born with claws and armor and strength, that simple refusal to surrender was the most terrifying weapon of all.